I used to love the scent of vanilla and wild jasmine. It reminded me of late spring evenings and freshly baked sugar cookies. Warm, comforting, like something you'd want to wrap yourself in. He once told me it made me smell like home. So I wore it for him on my birthday. It was a ritual, really. Every year I'd bake the same chocolate espresso cake, his favorite, not mine, and scatter tea lights around the living room like tiny stars had fallen from the ceiling. I liked the idea of light being everywhere on the day I was born. That evening, the house smelled of cocoa and anticipation. I wore my softest sweater, the one he always ran his fingers down absent-mindedly when we watched movies. I even put on lipstick, red, daring, the kind I used to wear before I dimmed myself into the version of me that pleased him. He was late. I checked my phone once, twice, then again until the screen stopped lighting up in hope. I kept telling myself traffic, maybe a last-minute errand, maybe even flowers. But when the garage finally opened, 2 hours after I had lit the candles, I didn't smell gasoline or autumn leaves like I usually did when he came in. I smelled citrus and something too sweet, too sharp, a scent I didn't own. He entered with a laugh in his voice, but not in his eyes. He kissed my cheek, quick and dry. "Sorry, babe," he said, shrugging off his coat. "Work ran late." I stared at him, then slowly leaned in. The scent clung to his collar like a memory I didn't want. "That's not my perfume," I said softly, trying to steady my voice. "Who were you with?" He paused, just for a second, but it was long enough for a truth to bleed into the silence. "Oh, that?" he chuckled. "A coworker hugged me goodbye. Tanya. She's dramatic like that, probably bathed in it." He grinned like it was funny, like it was also absurd that I should laugh too. But I didn't laugh. I stared at him, at his shoes not quite aligned by the door, at the way his left hand kept fidgeting, tugging the cuff of his sleeve like he needed to hide something. We ate in silence. Or rather, I watched him nibble at the reheated dinner while I tried not to choke on my own thoughts. The cake remained untouched on the kitchen counter. The candles had burned halfway down, wax curling like tired fingers. Later, when he went to shower, I picked up his coat to hang it. It was instinct, habit. But something stiff was nestled deep in the inside pocket, a thin, rectangular shape that didn't belong. I pulled it out slowly, like it might bite. A hotel keycard, branded with gold foil letters. My birthday printed on the little sleeve. I stared at it for a long time. I don't even remember breathing. The silence around me wasn't empty. It was deafening. Like the moment before a scream. I didn't go. Upstairs. I didn't follow him. I sat on the couch and placed the card next to the melted candles, next to the cold cake. My birthday. He said she was just a coworker. But coworkers don't book hotel rooms on someone's birthday. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel anger. Just a stillness that frightened me more than rage. Like something had cracked inside. Me, and the air was leaking out. The perfume still lingered in the hallway. I couldn't get it out of my nose. Before him, I used to write stories in the quiet glow of dawn. I'd curl my fingers around a chipped mug of cinnamon coffee, listening to rain hit the windows, and dream up worlds where women didn't apologize for taking up space. That was the woman I used to be. We met at a corporate seminar in Boston. The room smelled of burnt coffee, starched shirts, and paper. Pages being flipped, notes being scribbled, ambition soaking the air like humidity. I wore my hair pinned back, professional but soft. He noticed me during the breakout session and slid into the empty chair beside me like we were two puzzle pieces waiting for alignment. "I like your handwriting," he said, pointing to the margin doodles I hadn't meant to show. "You look like someone who notices things." I remember blushing. It had been so long since someone looked at me with curiosity rather than utility. I told him I was a freelance writer and editor, mostly from home. He asked what I wrote. I said fiction, sometimes essays, and braced myself for the usual polite smile. But he didn't laugh. Not then. He leaned forward, eyes kind. You must have a beautiful imagination. That was how it began. He made me feel seen, like all the invisible parts of me suddenly had a spotlight. Over the next few months, we texted, called, met up for coffee. He'd send me articles and say, "This made me think of something you said." He remembered details. My fear of elevators, the name of my cat who had died when I was 10, the way I felt out of place in boardrooms but powerful behind a keyboard. When he kissed me for the first time, I thought, maybe I won't have to fight so hard to be understood anymore. But understanding, I would learn, is not the same as cherishing. We moved in together a year later. Then came the ring. It wasn't extravagant, but he said it symbolized clarity over chaos. I wore it proudly, too. Proudly, maybe. Like it proved something to the world about my worth. Slowly, the shape of my life began to change. He got a job offer in a different state. More money, more prestige. I had just landed a steady writing gig with a digital magazine, but when he said, "Come with me, we'll build something better," I nodded like someone agreeing to a dream. We moved to the suburbs, a wide, clean street with houses that looked like they'd been copied and pasted. At first, I tried to keep writing, but between setting up the house, helping him network, and learning how to be the kind of wife people praised, my words started to dry up. "I just think your stuff's too sentimental," he said one night, reading one of my pieces. "You're talented, don't get me wrong, but it's not real writing." That was the first time I tucked my laptop away and left it there. I began to host dinner parties. I memorized his boss's favorite whiskey, learned how to fold napkins like swans, and kept the house spotless. I told myself I was investing in us, that love required sacrifice, that one day when things were more stable, I could write again, but the stability never came, only a slow, numbing erosion. He flirted freely, waitresses, baristas, wives of colleagues, always with a laugh to brush it off. "You know, I only have eyes for you, babe." But it didn't feel like I was being looked at anymore, only looked past. The finances became his domain. He insisted it was easier, more efficient. I wasn't. "Good with numbers," he'd say with a smirk, like it was cute. He canceled one of my credit cards once, said it was an error. I believed him. My friends began to fade. At first, it was hard to coordinate schedules. Then it was awkward silences when they'd visit and he'd make comments. My best friend, Clara, once pulled me aside after a dinner party and whispered, "Why does he talk to you like that?" I defended him. Of course I did. I said he was tired, that he joked that way with everyone. She never came back. Even my mother noticed. One Thanksgiving, he snapped at me in the kitchen because I forgot to toast the pecans for the salad. "Jesus, how hard is it to follow one recipe?" he said, loud enough that the silverware paused in the dining room. My mother raised an eyebrow. I remember the way her hand gripped mine under the table, quietly, like she wanted to anchor me to something real, but I let go. The truth is, I didn't want to believe I was losing myself. I wanted to believe I was evolving, maturing. That being someone's partner meant compromise. That love was supposed to feel safe, even if it was lonely. Now, when I look back, I see how expertly he rewrote my script. How he made me grateful, for crumbs. How he trained me to believe I was lucky, so lucky, to have him. And I believed it, because the woman I used to be was already fading, pixel by pixel, until all that was left was a version he had curated. I used to be someone who woke up with stories pressing against her ribcage, demanding to be born. Now, I was a woman who folded his laundry into neat little piles and wore perfume he liked just to be noticed. The night I found the hotel key card, Something deep inside me stirred. Not a scream, not a sob. Something older. A whisper from the woman. I used to be wake up. The next morning, I didn't wake up. I emerged. My body moved before my thoughts did, like muscle memory carved from instinct. I brushed my hair, tied it back. I pulled on the jeans he once said made me look like a college girl again, though now they hung looser at the waist. I didn't wear makeup. I didn't need war paint. This wasn't a battle. It was a burial. His cologne still lingered in the bathroom from the night before. Bitter, woody, with a hint of that citrus note I used to associate with love. Now it just made my stomach turn. I slid into my car and drove, keeping a few car lengths behind him. He was predictable. He always left for early meetings on Thursdays. I used to admire his discipline. Today, I just tracked it like one would trace a vein before an injection. He didn't drive to the office. He took the highway, east. The sun hadn't yet burned the chill off the morning. My fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles, pale. I turned off the radio. I didn't want distraction. I wanted to feel every second of this. He pulled into the parking lot of a boutique hotel nestled between a wine bar and a spa. One of those places designed for getaways, but close, enough to home that no one asked questions. The kind of place that smelled like roses and lies. I parked half a block down and waited. She came out first. Young, polished, lipstick perfectly intact. She wore heels too high for comfort and a laugh too loud for mourning. Then he appeared. My husband, smiling, not his polite public smile, his real one. The one he used to give me across the kitchen table when I burned the eggs but made the coffee just right. He kissed her like no one was watching, except someone was. I didn't cry. Not then. The grief was too big for tears. It sat heavy on my chest like an anchor, pressing the breath from me slowly. I lifted my phone and took a photo. Just one. Proof. Not for the world. For myself. So that when I doubted, because I would doubt, I could look at that photo and remember what was true. I drove home on autopilot, fingers numb against the leather steering wheel. The keycard still sat on the mantel, tucked behind the photo of us in Santorini. His arm around me. My smile as wide as the Aegean. When he came home that night, it was like nothing had changed. "Hey," he said, tossing his keys into the ceramic bowl by the door. "You didn't cook?" "No," I said simply. He shrugged and opened the fridge. "We've got leftovers, right?" I pulled out my phone and slid it across the counter. He looked at the screen, the photo, then at me. Nothing. No panic, no apology, not even a flicker of shame. He just sighed, like I had brought him the wrong coffee order. "I was going to tell you," he said. "Eventually." "How long?" My voice barely rose above a whisper. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "A few months? Maybe more." The world blurred. My skin prickled with heat. "You kissed her," I said. "Outside a hotel, on my birthday." "She makes me feel wanted," he said flatly. I blinked. "And I don't?" He looked me dead in the eye. "You've let yourself go. We haven't been in love for a long time. You knew that." There it was. Not the affair, but the dagger of disdain, carved clean into the heart of everything we were. I stood still for a moment, just breathing, just absorbing. He turned away, already opening the fridge. "I bought cake," I said. He didn't turn. "Back. I made it from scratch," I added, quieter. Still nothing. I walked out the back door without another word. The air outside was sharp and cool, the kind that fills your lungs like glass. I crossed the yard and sat beneath the old sycamore tree, the one where he'd knelt years ago, ring in hand. voice trembling with promise. My wedding ring was cold, on my finger. I slid it off, held it in my palm like a relic. It was strange how heavy something so small could feel, like it carried the whole weight of every lie, every compromise, every quiet betrayal. I didn't cry. Instead, I laid back in the yai, damp grass, and watched the stars flicker awake. I stayed there for hours. Through the hum of distant traffic, the rustle of wind through branches, the gentle creak of the back fence swinging open. He didn't come looking. Good. The earth held me, my skin kissed by dew, my fingers curled around a ring that no longer meant anything. But in that silence, beneath that tree, something stirred. Not rage, not vengeance. A spark. A faint glowing ember of the woman I used to be. Small but alive. "I'm still here," she whispered. And I believed her. I didn't leave with a grand speech or a dramatic slam of the door. I just disappeared. One morning, while he was in the shower humming like nothing had shattered, I packed a single duffel bag. Essentials only. 2 sweaters, jeans, toiletries, the leather-bound journal I hadn't written in for years, and a photo of my mother, her arms wrapped around a laughing, younger version of me on the beach. I withdrew what I could from our joint account. Not everything. Just enough. Enough to vanish, but not enough to alert him too soon. My hands trembled as I entered the PIN. The screen flashed transaction complete, and I stared at it longer than necessary, as if waiting for some sign of permission, of release. And then I drove. No destination. Just forward. Through the suburbs, past the highways, into the skeletal trees of winter and the fog-kissed backroads of upstate. The farther I went, the easier it became to breathe, though not fully. Not yet. I ended up at the old lakeside cabin my late aunt had left me years ago. I hadn't been there since the funeral. The lock was stiff, the air smelled of dust and pine, but the silence was immediate, clean, final. At first, it was unbearable. Every creak of the wooden floorboards echoed louder than words. The wind howled through the chimney like a grief too big for walls. I wandered from room to room like a ghost, dragging a blanket behind me, eyes glassy, soul raw. I found old photo albums in the closet. One had a picture of me at 12, holding a ribbon from a writing contest. My smile was uneven, gap-toothed, joyful. I wept like something inside me had cracked wide open. The silence wasn't empty. It was crowded. With memory. With questions I hadn't dared ask when he was around. Who had I become? When did I stop hearing my own voice? I lit a fire in the hearth that night, sat cross-legged on the rug, and opened my journal. The pages were blank. So was I. But the next morning, I walked to the edge of the lake, where the mist hovered just above the surface like a sleeping thought. I stood barefoot on the frost-tipped dock and breathed in the cold until my lungs burned clean, and when I came back inside, I wrote. The words were clumsy at first, hesitant, but they came. I wrote about the birthday that broke me, the perfume that wasn't mine, the kiss I witnessed from behind a windshield. I wrote about the woman who sat under a sycamore tree and let the stars keep her company. I wrote about silence, not as a void, but as a kind of grace. And then I kept writing. Filled 2 pages, then 5, then 10. My fingers ached, and my heart softened. A few days later, I wandered into the town's small library. It smelled like old pages and lemon polish. A woman behind the desk looked up from her crossword. "You're new," she said. I nodded. "I'm Nora." I liked her instantly. She had a kindness that didn't probe. The sort of woman who wouldn't flinch if you cried in front of her but wouldn't ask why either. We exchanged small talk. She offered tea. I sat in a corner with a stack of books and didn't realize until hours later how much time had passed. The next week, Nora mentioned a local newsletter needing someone to write a seasonal feature. "It's not much," she said, stirring her tea. "But it pays. You write, don't you?" I almost denied it. The reflex was strong. Years of dismissal and mockery trained me to diminish myself. But then I nodded. "Yes, I do." And just like that, I was working again. A paragraph here, a travel blurb there, editing typos, writing about winter festivals and lakeside hikes. The work wasn't glamorous. It didn't carry bylines or book deals. But it was mine. Every keystroke felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. A whisper from the girl in the photo, the one who once dreamed with her whole chest. At night, I'd sit by the fire, wrapped in the same blanket I'd dragged that first day. I'd light a single candle. Not because I needed the light, but because I liked the flicker. It reminded me of the birthday candles I once lit for a man who didn't come home in time. Now, I lit them for myself. Each flame was a vow. You are not invisible. You are not small. You are still here. And the silence that once screamed, it began to hum. I stopped counting the days. Somewhere between winter's retreat and the first blush of spring, I stopped waking with a pit in my stomach. The silence that had once scraped against my nerves now wrapped around me like a weighted blanket. I filled it with small, sacred rituals, grinding coffee beans by hand in the mornings, walking barefoot along the pebbled edge of the lake, letting myself read aloud from old journals without cringing at the vulnerability in my younger voice. The cabin had taken on a new scent, cedarwood and lemon balm tea, with traces of ink and candle wax. Gone was the sterile stillness of abandonment. Now, it felt like someone lived here. Someone real. Me. I picked up freelance projects, slowly at first. A tourism blog wanted poetic descriptions of rural hiking trails. A nonprofit needed a grant writer. I wrote under a pen name, Elena Marin, a nod to the name my mother almost gave me and the lake I now lived beside. It felt fitting, like claiming a version of myself untouched by him. One night, while editing a travel essay, I paused to rub my eyes and glanced at my reflection in the darkened laptop screen. The woman staring back at me looked full. Not in the physical sense, but full of something rooted. She wore soft wool sweaters and chipped nail polish, and her hair was messier than he ever would have approved of. But her eyes? They didn't flinch anymore. I whispered, "I remember you." And then I smiled. Because it was true. The message came on a Thursday morning. A ping from a number I didn't recognize. It was just a screenshot. No context. No greeting. It was a Spotify cover. My ex and the woman, her, leaning into microphones, smiling like smug frauds beneath a title that made my stomach turn. Real talk. Building authentic love after trauma. I stared at it in stunned silence. The tagline underneath? Conversations about truth, healing, and building real connection after betrayal. My hands went cold. I clicked the link. Their voices greeted me, hers, sweet and flirty, his, rehearsed and self-important. I listened. Then I wished I hadn't. They told a version of our story, twisted like a wet rag. She had helped him find his truth. I had grown bitter and resentful, stifled his growth, held on to pain too long. But that wasn't what cracked me open. It was the line, word for word, from an unpublished piece I had written in the cabin. Sometimes leaving isn't running away. It's remembering how to walk alone. He said it, as if it belonged to him. I closed the app. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I brewed tea. Then I pulled out the flash drive where I had saved everything. Drafts, emails, voice memos. I opened a blank document. And I began to write, not like a woman burned, but like a woman rising. The essay took me 4 days. I called it The Year I Disappeared. It wasn't a takedown, it was a resurrection. I told my story with clarity and control. I described the perfume that clung to his collar on my birthday, the silence of the lake, the ring I no longer wore. I didn't name him, not yet, but I named me. I sent it to Isabel, my former writing group friend, now a senior editor at a popular online publication. We hadn't spoken in years. She responded within 2 hours. This is gold. If you're sure, I want to publish it immediately. I was sure. The essay went live the next morning. I didn't check stats or comments. I went for a walk instead. The lake shimmered under a rising sun, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. By the end of the week, the essay had gone viral. People whispered about who it might be. Others guessed. A few recognized the lines stolen for the podcast and pointed them out loudly. Their sponsors began pulling out. The podcast took a brief hiatus. I watched it all unfold from the quiet sanctuary of my aunt's cabin, wrapped in a wool throw, a mug of tea in hand. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. Then came the email, from him. Subject: You win. The body was short, 3 sentences. Hope the attention was worth it. You've made your point. I loved you once. Don't forget that. I stared at it, unmoved. He didn't say sorry. He never did. I didn't reply. Instead, I attached the email, along with the others, the receipts, the podcast quotes, to the folder I'd titled Closure on my desktop. I passed it to my lawyer, who was now handling the final stages of our divorce. My ring, his grandmother's, once so revered, sat in a velvet box at her office. I'd asked her to donate the proceeds from its sale to a foundation for domestic emotional abuse survivors. It seemed fitting. The day I revealed my name publicly, I wore red lipstick. It was a small act, a silent one, but it was for me. I posted a video, faceless, just a soft voiceover against a black screen, explaining why I was coming forward. Not for revenge, not for fame, but for anyone who had ever disappeared inside a relationship, for anyone who forgot their name, for anyone who wanted to come home to themselves. And I said my name, clearly, steadily. My name is Marin Calloway. I wrote the year I disappeared. I didn't vanish. I was rebuilding. That night, I lit a candle, sandalwood and rose, and placed it beside the window. I sat in the chair where I'd first typed the story, pulled the knit blanket over my knees, and listened to the wind outside. There was no applause, no grand finale, but there was peace. And sometimes, that's louder than any revenge. I didn't go back for revenge. I went back for the girl I used to be. The one who stood on city sidewalks, heart split wide open, waiting for someone to choose her. I went back for the woman I had become, whose story no longer lived in the shadows of a man's denial. The city greeted me like a ghost. Familiar, but changed. I stayed in a small hotel with warm lighting and tall windows that overlooked the river. The same river where he once gave me tulips on our 3rd anniversary. I remembered the way he'd smiled that day. Genuine, before the lies. Before I learned how betrayal could wear the face of love. The air smelled like spring, rain-soaked pavement, distant lilacs blooming near the water's edge. I carried only one suitcase. Inside it, my reading copy, a crimson scarf, and the ring, his grandmother's, tucked in a velvet pouch like a relic of a life that no longer fit. The reading was held at Whitmore Books, the old shop with creaky floors and towering shelves. We used to come here together. He never liked it. said it smelled like dust and nostalgia. But I loved it, and that's why I chose it. It had survived developers, chain stores, even a fire. Like me. The room filled slowly. Friends, strangers, former coworkers, the curious, the quiet. I scanned the crowd without moving my head. And then, I saw him. He came, of course he did. He stood near the back, his posture tight, a forced calm to his expression. He looked thinner, paler. His eyes darted nervously, but when he met mine, he didn't look away. She was with him. I recognized her immediately. The coworker, the so-called truth-teller of his podcast. Her hand clung to his forearm, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. I opened my book. I read the chapter titled The Cake. It told the story of the night I discovered the affair, my birthday. The lemon cake I'd baked from scratch. The perfume that wasn't mine. The hotel keycard slipped between folded laundry. The silence he offered when I asked whose scent it was. The way I smiled through dinner anyway. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. The audience hung on every word. A few people wept. One woman covered her mouth with both hands. A man in the front row shook his head slowly, as if hearing something holy. I closed the book. "Thank you," I said, and it echoed through the room like a bell. Applause followed, hesitant at first, then full-bodied, standing even. But I didn't look for his reaction. That wasn't why I came. The Q&A was brief, a few thoughtful questions about healing, writing, solitude. I answered with honesty, not performance. Then he stood. My breath didn't hitch. My hands didn't shake. He looked older somehow, like shame had aged him in fast forward. "You made me look like a monster," he said, voice quiet, but bitter. The room hushed. The air tightened. I looked at him, truly looked, and saw someone who no longer had power over me. "I didn't make you look like anything," I said. "You just never imagined I'd speak." A pause. Thick. Final. He sat. I left through the back. No fanfare. No interviews. Just my scarf, my manuscript, and the last weight I had to release. I walked to the river, the same stone ledge where we once kissed under fireworks, young and dumb and believing forever was a promise, not a gamble. I pulled out the ring. The metal was cold in my palm, not heavy, not light. Just finished. "I release you," I whispered. Not to him, to myself, to the life that broke and rebuilt me. I leaned over the railing and let it fall. It hit the water with barely a sound, but inside me, it echoed. I returned home 2 days later. My little lakeside cabin waited quietly, the porch light I'd installed blinking at me like a wink. Nora had fed the cat, a scrappy gray tabby I'd rescued and named Sable. She met me at the door, tail high, eyes judging as always. I dropped my bag and opened the windows. The scent of pine and ink greeted me like a friend. Later that night, I brewed tea, wore thick socks, curled into my writing chair with a fleece blanket. An email pinged. Subject: Film rights interest. Let's talk. I didn't need to open it yet. I knew what it meant. My story, the story I once buried beneath guilt and silence, was growing wings. I smiled. Not because I won, because I survived. So if you're listening to this now, know this. The final gift I gave him wasn't exposure. It wasn't humiliation or revenge. It was the truth. And I gave it not for him, but for every woman who's ever doubted the sound of her own voice. Every person who's ever mistaken silence for weakness. I remembered my name, and I spoke it aloud.